becoming clear that a long trail of official negligence led to the Valentine's Day school shooting in Parkland, Florida. School officials failed, so did the FBI, but Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel has a distinguished record of exceptional ineptitude and arrogance. Under Israel's leadership, Broward deputies ignored repeated warnings about Nicholas Cruz's violent behavior. The department received at least 23 calls about Cruz or his family. In one call last November, a tipster specifically warned that Nicholas Cruz was, quote, a school shooter in the making, which of course turned out to be sadly true. Sheriff Israel did nothing. Under Israel's leadership, the department entered an agreement to drastically reduce student arrests. The goal was to eliminate the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, which at the time was a top priority of President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder. The effect was a disaster. Cruz might have been arrested and convicted of a crime. Were it not for that policy, he would never have been able to buy a gun. Once the Parkland shooting began, Israel's deputies refused their most basic duties. Deputy Scott Peterson, whose only job was to protect students at the school, hid while Cruz murdered 17 people. When 3 more Broward deputies arrived, they too took shelter behind their cars rather than try and enter the school and save the lives of children. Scott Israel is the man in charge of all of this, and of course he's responsible for it. He loudly disagrees. Indeed, Israel relentlessly brags about himself to all media who will record it. 2 years ago, for example, the local newspaper in Florida reported that Israel used tax dollars to build a personal political machine, and he clearly had. The evidence was there, stone cold. Confronted with it, Israel said this, quote, "What have I done differently than Don Shula or Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King or Gandhi?" End quote. And by the way, he said, lions don't care about the opinions of sheep. Stable people don't talk like this, obviously. Something is wrong with Sheriff Israel. As recently as yesterday, he was refusing to accept any responsibility in the face of his well-documented failures. Watch this exchange.
Do you think that if the Broward Sheriff's Office had done things differently, this shooting might not have happened?
Listen, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, O.J. Simpson would still be in the record books.
I don't know what that means. There's 17 dead people, and there's a whole long list of things your department could have done differently.
Remarkably, it got weirder and worse from there. Watch.
Are you really not taking any responsibility for the multiple red flags that were brought to the attention of the Broward Sheriff's Office about this shooter before the incident, whether it was people near him, close to him, calling the police on him?
Jake, I could only take responsibility for what I knew about. I exercised my due diligence. I've given amazing leadership to this agency.
Amazing leadership?
Yes, Jake.
Amazing leadership. And yet the facts suggest that Scott Israel should not be in charge of anything, and yet he is. Why? Richard Corcoran is the Speaker of the Florida House. He signed a letter calling for Israel's suspension as Sheriff of Broward County, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Speaker, thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Tucker.
So tell us what your letter says and why.
Well, and first, it wasn't just a letter from me. It was a letter from me and 73 of my colleagues, basically representatives accountable for 13+ million people in the state of Florida. And what we sent a letter to the governor saying, under the Constitution, he has the right to remove any local government official, suspend them, and take them out of office. And we said, basically, your authority to do so is if there are malfeasance, misfeasance, incompetence, neglect of duty, of which we believe that Sheriff Israel scores high on all 4 accounts. So we asked him to suspend him and go down there and take over the investigation and find a replacement. And so 74 of us signed it. The governor immediately, to his credit, called on FDLE, our state law enforcement agency, to go down there and seize the investigation and take over. But we'd still like to see him suspended by the governor, and then ultimately our Florida Senate has the ability to reinstate him or have him be removed completely. And I'm pretty sure, talking to my colleagues in the Senate, they'd remove him completely.
So my guess would be, of the 74 signatories, most or all were Republicans, which raises the question, why is this a partisan issue? So he had 4 deputies with guns at the scene of a school shooting and they refused to help. That's not a partisan question. You don't need to be a Republican to be appalled by that. Why did no Democrats support his removal?
Well, I think we do have the support. You know, it's very difficult, I think, for some of them because many of them are from that geographical area of Broward County.
Right.
A significant portion of our Democratic colleagues. So I think for them, it was like, you're right, go forward. We encourage you. But, you know, signing the the letter was something that was a step too far for them. But they're completely supportive. Whether it's the parents I've talked to of the victims, whether it's our colleagues across the aisle, everyone's disgusted with both his attitude and the investigation and what he's been doing to date.
So my impression is that the deputies who sat outside armed while 17 people were murdered at the school were within their legal rights. They were allowed to do that. Most of us respect law enforcement because we think they're willing to put their lives on the line for us. These people weren't. That seems to me maybe something that the legislature could address. If you're a deputy in charge of protecting the public, shouldn't you be obligated to protect the public?
Yeah, and let me say, Tucker, and I think you would say the same thing. I'm an outside counsel for a sheriff's office as part of my job as an attorney. I can tell you the sheriff's a friend of mine. I know tons of law enforcement officers. Not one single law enforcement officer that I know in that situation wouldn't have gone scrambling into that hallway, up the stairways, whatever it took to try to save those children. What we have here is a poorly run agency. And whether it was the officer on site or the three that came in the car or the officers that went out to his house, as you said, 23 times and never did anything even though he was a threat, whether it was the deal that he entered into with the superintendent of schools that basically said we're going to have a no arrest policy so he can bring guns and knives and bullets to school, all of these things. And the funny thing is this is by his own words. What Sheriff Israel said is in each one of those situations, the officers outside, the school resource officer inside, the people inside who denied first responders the ability to go help these kids, the agreement and those bullets coming to school. He's got every single person under investigation, but he just wants to hold himself accountable for all these people that he has to investigate for their wrongdoing, but he's done none. And the height of arrogance, as you said, Tucker, I mean, the only amazing thing about Sheriff Israel is his arrogance.
I mean, something's wrong, it seems like. This is not normal behavior. But quickly, in the military, there's a sanction, a penalty for cowardice, because the point is, you're not allowed to be a coward. You're in the military, and I think the same would go, wouldn't you say, for a sheriff's deputy or any law enforcement? Most aren't cowards, but for those who are, shouldn't there be some penalty for that?
There should. I mean, we should look at taking away their pensions. If you don't act the way you should in a situation where there are 14 children's lives at stake and 3 adults, absolutely, you should have your pension taken away.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Speaker Corcoran, I appreciate coming on tonight.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tucker.
Well, as you just heard, EMTS are telling Fox tonight that police officers prevented them for some reason from entering Stoneman Douglas High School to provide care to kids who were dying. Fox's Matt Finn has new exclusive information on that story tonight. Matt?
Tucker, 3 high-ranking Florida officials are expressing their frustration because they say EMS was delayed getting inside Stoneman Douglas High School on the day of the shooting in the critical moments when victims lay inside in need of immediate care. One source tells Fox News some EMS teams requested to go inside but were denied by the commanding agency, the Broward County Sheriff's Office. That source alleges scanner recordings will reveal that. Now, the Broward County Sheriff's Office released a statement in response to some of these allegations, saying in part there are multiple investigations being conducted in addition to the Stoneman Douglas shooting. Investigators will not be rushed or asked to jump to conclusions. A reporter from our Miami affiliate WSVN reports that a seasoned first responder said they would have risked their life to go inside and that they were frustrated the entire time they were there. However, the Coral Springs Parkland fire chief, who was on scene that day, says it is procedure that EMS cannot go inside until law enforcement clears them to enter. The fire chief says law enforcement could not initially confirm if the suspect fled or was deceased, making it too dangerous to let EMS inside. That fire chief telling Fox News in part, decisions cannot be made in a vacuum. It is possible that those that are upset about not being allowed inside simply do not have all of the information that our law enforcement partners had in making their decision. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is investigating all the actions by the Broward County Sheriff, which will hopefully shed light on the timeline of that day.
I know a lot more than you all do now. So all I'm going to say is, yes, I believe there needs to be a full investigation. I don't think some people were honest. And we're going to investigate this in Florida, and the right thing will be done.
Tucker, a rules committee in the Florida Senate today voted down a proposal on a statewide ban on assault weapons here in Florida. Tucker.
Matt, thanks a lot. Sheriff Scott Israel would never blame his own repeated failures for the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School. Instead, he needed to blame an organization that was not involved, the NRA. During CNN's 1984-esque town hall meeting last week, Israel played the demagogue against NRA spokeswoman Dana Lash. Watch.
You just told this group of people that you are standing up for them. You're not standing up for them until you say, I want less weapons.
Dana Lash joins us tonight. Dana, when I was watching that, my first thought was he doesn't sound much like a sheriff. He sounds like someone running for office, a Tammany politician, a red-faced blowhard, a demagogue. It doesn't sound like something a law enforcement official would say in a town hall. What do you make of that?
I completely agree with you, Tucker, and I'm so glad that you're talking about this, because this is the failure, and this is where the failure took place. It was with this man and his leadership as Broward County Sheriff. And I'll have everybody know, Tucker, as well, before the sheriff took that stage, him and I sitting up there for this town hall, he was allowed to go out and give a rally-style speech in which he railed against special interests and was naming the NRA and really setting the stage up to go after 5 million law-abiding innocent Americans who didn't get all of the 45, I think is what BuzzFeed reported, tips that his office received. They didn't have the murderer calling his office himself, telling him that he thought he was a threat and that police needed to do something. Family members weren't calling the NRA reporting this. They were calling his office. And so he has a lot of explaining to do. And one more quick thing, Tucker. I asked the sheriff on stage whether or not he could have actually arrested this murderer based on a Florida state statute that treated anyone sending electronic or written threats of bodily injury, harm, or death to other individuals, as this murderer did with his classmates, whether he could have arrested that individual charged with a felony. And the sheriff did indicate that he could, but then he glossed right by it and wanted to refocus and shift responsibility away from his dereliction of duty. I think he owes a lot of innocent Americans an apology.
Well, but it's also really troubling because, I mean, this guy's not a congressman from Camden. He has the power to put people in jail, to take their lives away from them. He's a law enforcement official. And this behavior seems reckless and dishonest and weird, comparing yourself to, to MLK and Gandhi. I mean, does it seem like there's something wrong with him?
And, you know, you mentioned that Game of Thrones quote, the lion doesn't worry about the opinions of the sheep. Well, he mentioned that again yesterday in a radio interview with a South Florida station, and he was attacking all of those, including the congressman that you just had on, the lawmaker that you just had on, the state of Florida, who was calling for his resignation. And, you know, I agree with you. I wish that this would have come out on the stage. I wish that this truth would have been known at that particular time. It seemed as that he was more interested in turning this into a campaign stop. And I will say that this really explains why the Coral Springs police chief came out against the Broward County sheriff the way that they did. They said in a statement that the truth is going to come out because Coral Springs police reacted. They were the first ones in, and they seem to be really calling the Broward sheriff out on what I can only assume to be showboating was what they were suggesting in their letter. And there had to be a lot of drama behind the scenes for other law enforcement officers who really, I mean, these are the guys who, I mean, they sacrificed. They ran in, they heard the sound of gunfire and screaming, Tucker, and they ran in and they did what they could to save innocence. That's why we love our law enforcement, because of what they do for us. And now it's no wonder that they came out against this Broward County sheriff.